Lord Deben, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here. This is one of the quickest turnarounds I've ever done. I never understand about your airport in Oslo. There is no way of landing except at one end of it. Have you noticed? That's a very, very long walk always. I think it's in order to encourage us to buy Norwegian timber, because you walk over that very good floor for a long way. I'm extremely pleased to be here. It's my 5th visit to Oslo this year. And on my Twitter feed, I have, apart from Australians, more Norwegians than any other country. So if you want to join the discussion, much of which is in Norwegian, that's the bit I don't understand. It's at Lord Deben. I'm the chairman of the Climate Change Committee in Britain. We have what is at the moment a unique system, but it's one which other countries are following. Mexico is about to do precisely the same sort of thing. The Danes, I think, are within one step of it. It looks as if other countries too are following. And there's been a good deal of interest in Norway, because the advantage of what we do is to take the issue of climate change as far as possible outside the vagaries of political argument. In the sense that we have a difficult system in Britain because no parliament can bind its successor. And it's difficult too because now that we have fixed 5-year parliaments, we even more signify the fact that the democratic mechanism is entirely out of sync with the demands of any long-term continued policy towards climate change. Now, I think it's an important beginning point, because it seems to me that this has much wider implications than just climate change. Many of the issues of which we are faced now are global issues, and global issues demand global solutions. The problem is we don't have a system, we don't have an institution that can deal with these things. That's the real issue. If you don't have an institution, then you have to make it up as you go along. That's not the best way to provide for long-term planning. So we decided that in Britain that we would have a system which is as impervious to political change as is possible within a democratic structure. And it came about because it was Parliament that decided on it. It was not a government act, it was an opposition act. The Conservative Party in Britain worked with Friends of the Earth to produce the climate change bill, and they then convinced the Liberal Democrats and everyone else who was in the opposition to support it. So it had 100% of the opposition. That still was a big gap between us and the government. And it was quite difficult getting the opposition together, because we got everybody except the Protestant Unionists from the north of Ireland. I was then sent off to try to deal with the Protestant Unionists, because they'd said they couldn't sign the letter we had written round the Act. And the letter used a number of common illustrations of the importance of climate change, and one of them was to say if you dig down through the ice for 800,000 years, you find that this is the fastest growing period when heat rises, and the fastest growing period when carbon is produced in all those 800,000 years. And the Protestant Unionists from Northern Ireland said they couldn't sign that because the world had only been operating from 86,000 years. But that's what Archbishop Usher had added up from. They sent me, I don't know why they sent me, because I'm a Catholic. I'm not sure this was a terribly good idea, but anyway, I used 40 years of political nous and struck out 800 years and put in the words "for a very long time," and they then signed it. So that worked extremely well. So we had 100% there. And we then said to the government that we had signed up 100 of its members to vote with us and to break the 3-line whip. The government's absolutely furious, and particularly the Treasury. And I do think it's an important lesson to learn, which is that the Treasury always hates any long-term planning of this kind. particularly that which takes the power out of the Treasury's hands. It's not because they're wicked people, it's because they are in the Treasury. And it is the nature of treasuries to want to have control. And all around the world when I go and speak, everyone nods in support when I mention the Treasury, because it's always a problem. And it's a problem under any government. It's a problem under this government. I mean, we've got a very green government, but we have a Treasury that hates everything I do. I mean, it's just the nature of the sort of human being that becomes Chancellor of the Exchequer. And the only exception in British history was Ken Clarke, who was never really, well, he is much more of a human being than a Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's very, very rare. And we got a lot of very good green things out of him that I haven't known anyone before or since. And the interesting thing is it doesn't matter which party it is. It's absolutely non-party political. It is just treasuries. So the worst one we dealt with was in fact a Labour treasury. It was Gordon Brown when he was Chancellor. He hated the whole idea. And then he became Prime Minister and he hated it even more. But we had the majority, so we put it through. And we even increased the statutory target. The central part of the Act is that Britain is committed to reduce its emissions by 80% by the year 2050. It started off at 60%, but then everybody did the maths again, and then we introduced it to 80%, and the government gave way, and that is what we now have. So we have a statutory demand for that. And then we have an independent committee, which I chair. I'm the second chairman of it. An independent committee which has a series of jobs, but the first one is to lay down the budgets by which we reach 2050 in the most cost-effective way. So we're now on the fourth carbon budget, which it goes up to 2027, and next year I shall start on the fifth carbon budget, which will take us to 2032. So the whole idea is to be well ahead of yourself, so that business knows exactly how much the pressure is going to be. There are some faults with it, which I will explain later, but that is what we do. Now, it is a committee entirely of experts, in the sense that there are 8 members, of which 6 are scientists and 2 are economists. I am the only non-scientist and non-economist as the chairman, and I am appointed in an odd way. I'm not appointed by the Prime Minister, which everyone else is. I'm appointed by the Minister responsible for climate change and energy, and the 3 First Ministers of the 3 devolved parliaments. So I'm appointed by the Liberal Democrat Minister responsible for climate change and energy, the Socialist Minister, First Minister of Wales, the Scottish Nationalist First Minister of Scotland, and you've guessed it, the Protestant Unionist Minister and First Minister of Ireland, which is odd that they then ended up with a Conservative Catholic as their... but it does mean I am very independent. I mean, there's no doubt about that, so but it works very well. And I suppose I do bring to the committee one expertise, which is that of agriculture, which I was Minister of Agriculture, both Deputy and Minister for 7 years, and come from an agricultural background and farm. And so, in that sense, one does bring some expertise to this. But otherwise, these are people who are climatologists. They are, we have the Director General of the independent fiscal body of Britain, and we have the Director of the Grantham Institute, who is a very distinguished Swiss economist. And then we have a series of Nobel Prize winners and others who are the rest of the committee. And then we have a team of some 35 people who do the work for us and produce the documents, and we then argue over them. And what we do is, having set the budgets, we then have to monitor whether the government is reaching those budgets and telling it, if it isn't, what it has to do it. And we do actually have a sort of residual power, which is that we could, in fact, take them to court for not doing it. That's a very unusual circumstance. I doubt if it'll happen, because they don't much like feeling they might be taken to court. And so far, we're a bit ahead of ourselves. And rather importantly, although we're a bit ahead of ourselves, we've not banked it. In other words, although in the first 5-year period we've done better than we had to do, we've not backed it. So we won't make it easier in the future to do it, which of course is very important, because otherwise, if you're not careful, you'll end up with 5 years because you don't have to do anything. If you keep ahead of yourself, you want actually to be ahead of yourself, because if anything, when we have, although very tough targets, climate change isn't waiting for us. So monitoring, setting the targets, monitoring, and then looking at a whole range of other things. We're supposed to keep the government and the public aware of any changes in the science. We have to communicate with the public and talk through what it is that we're doing. We have to look at competitiveness and see whether the measures that we've suggested and which the government is taking are actually causing difficulties with Britain's competitiveness. We have to look at the efficacy of individual projects. And every year we have to produce a report as to what has happened during that year. And then every 5 years we do a sort of deep dive. We're just doing the deep dive now, which will have some pretty tough things to say about the areas in which we have succeeded and not succeeded. In other words, it's designed to cheer people on where they've done well and to kick them in the pants where they haven't done so well, but you have to do both of these. And then you can't help it, but you get yourself involved in the considerable amount of debate and discussion around the issues of climate change. It's one of the things that really fascinates me, and I still don't know the answer to it, and that is why it is that those who don't believe in climate change are so angry. They are so cross, they're so rude, and so unpleasant. Every now and again, I retweet the tweets of my nastiest trolls in order for people to see just how ridiculous is their argument and how vulgar they are. Because I think it's a good thing for people to realise how unpleasant after all, this is a very simple scientific discussion. I mean, is it happening or is it not happening? Well, it's so overwhelmingly likely that it's happening, it's really not very sensible to have an argument any longer. And then the next discussion is, if it is happening, which we accept it is happening, what should we do about it? Well, you can have perfectly reasonable arguments as to whether it's better to have wind power or solar or what the issues are. They can have all sorts of discussions like that. It doesn't seem to me you have to get angry about it. But they are very angry. And I think it's worth thinking about why they're so angry. They're very angry, really, because they'd rather like climate change not to be happening. And they think there is something unpleasant about a world in which climate change does happen, because it challenges some of their fundamental views about the world. This is why the Americans are particularly prone to be particularly angry, because it does actually say about the extreme free enterprise people, and I speak as a conservative, it says about them something really rather dangerous. It says, you have got to do something as a community to deal with something which is an attack on the community. And of course, if you're the Koch brothers, or you are a Republican Tea Party member, you don't like that, because it suggests that you're not an individual, but you're part of a community. And that's very upsetting for them. And of course, it challenges them in all sorts of ways. It challenges them in their sort of go west young man kind of attitude, and it challenges them too religiously, because the great heresy of American religion was that individualism, that people who were successful were blessed by God, and those who weren't obviously had done something wrong. And there's a great deal of that in American Protestantism.
Comes from the Dutch.
Well, it may come from the Dutch, but I don't want to blame the Dutch for everything, because there's lots of other things to blame them for, which we might But the fact is, it is a very interesting threat to people's worldview. And that's why I think the anger takes place. And if you look at the European elections and look at the extreme right parties, you find they are in common, all one thing in common with them, apart from being thoroughly nasty and unpleasant. The other thing they've got in common is that they are, in fact, all disbelievers in climate change, or believers that it's all being done by the sun, or that it's all happened before and we just haven't noticed, and all sorts of other reasons, but any sort of reason that doesn't mean they've got to face the issue of climate change. The great advantage of the Climate Change Act is that we can't avoid facing the issue of climate change. And the trouble with democracy is that it's much easier to do tomorrow what you want to put off from today. Democracy is much easier, you say, after the next election. And on that basis, we wouldn't start doing this until 2049, because it just is very difficult to get there, because there's always a very good reason for making sure you're re-elected, because those other lot will be so awful that it really is, you've just got to hold it up for a bit. And so the mechanism we have achieved is fundamentally one which enshrines the commonality of view of sensible people across the political spectrum, which is a continuing feature. Doesn't mean to say it's easy, because any sitting government always has a group who would prefer to put things off. If it's a centre-right government, as we have at the moment, a Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition, then the extreme right of the Conservative Party, of course, finds all this inimical for many of the reasons we've suggested. So they're always making a fuss about it, one way or another. But as I've spent my life in politics as a Conservative politician, I've been fighting them all the time. But it's always, any party has got a bit that you have to deal with, and that's our bit. And the coalition works quite well because it's sensible Conservatives coalescing with sensible Liberal Democrats, and the open-toed sandals and woolly mitten parts of the Liberal Democrats aren't really in the government. So that puts them off on one side, and it keeps us really rather sensible. Now, the Labour Party has got the same problem, because in their party, their problem is that there are quite a lot of people whose concentration on poverty, understandable and perfectly decent, but their concentration on poverty, particularly fuel poverty, means that they're always wanting to say, well, we've got to deal with that first. And so there's always a drag tendency as far as they're concerned. And again, the Climate Change Act means that you can't drag. It just keeps the momentum up. It doesn't remove the argument, and indeed one finds oneself in the middle of the argument for much of the time. But it does mean that in the end you are almost guaranteed success. I only say that because I suppose you could have an electoral revolution in which you had a sufficient majority, both in the House of Commons and one that could force that majority on the House of Lords, to repeal the Act, because you can't do anything except repeal the Act. And that's how it was built. It was built so that you actually had to get a majority of over 50% to be able to repeal the Act. And it's very difficult to see that in the political spectrum of today. And I think most of us would agree that climate change is likely to become more clear, and is becoming more clear, even to the recalcitrants. Very interesting to see how the opponents have been moving very significantly as they find it more and more difficult to argue the science. So whereas they were deniers, they hated the word because they said it was somehow rude, it isn't, it was true. They denied that it was happening. Well, very few of them now deny it's happening. Much more, they dismiss it. They say either that it's happening for reasons which we can't deal with, so we may as well ignore it, or they say it's happening, but it's not happening anything like fast or needs anything like the extreme decisions that we want to make, and anyway something will turn up, something will happen. There'll be a technological breakthrough, and it'll all be okay. And the other argument in the middle of that, which is quite a dangerous argument, I think, for those of us who are trying to be rational about it, but it goes like this. Yes, it is happening. Yes, it is serious, but we don't know enough about what will be the solutions to do anything about it now. Laptop fallacy. You remember when they started with laptops, there were certain sorts of people who said, well, I don't want to buy this laptop because there's a new one coming. And in the end, they never bought a laptop because they were constantly waiting for the one that was just, because they didn't want to waste money on the laptop that was the best at the time. I think that's what these people are saying to us, is that you mustn't do anything which commits yourself to anything, because that might be more expensive than a better answer you'll find later on. But now, of course, you do have to have a portfolio view, in the sense that we see that it is important, in order to meet our expectations, to have a mix of generating capacity, because obviously in order to achieve our ends we have to decarbonise our electricity system by somewhere in the very early 2030s. So if we're going to do that, we'll need nuclear, we'll need offshore wind, we'll need onshore wind, we'll need photovoltaics, and we'll need some residual gas into the 2030s, and we'll need a certain amount of biomass. And what we're trying to do, and we hope that we'll have some tidal, so you put all this together and you make a mix, which is the most sensible way when you don't know for certain what will happen. And we hope that we will have carbon capture and storage. And it may be that there is a huge breakthrough in terms of the storage of electricity, which obviously would make a very major difference, and would make offshore wind, for example, and onshore wind and photovoltaics really very much more valuable. So you've got to have a portfolio, but you've also got to have a balance in that portfolio. And this is when you get into the other problem of doing my job, which is that I'm not only attacked by my enemies on the "it isn't really happening as badly as you think, and so why don't we leave it for a bit" lot, but it's also by the people on the other end of the scale for whom everything has to happen now, and anything that doesn't happen now is a betrayal of the religion. And the religion of the renewable is, I think, an extremely dangerous religion. Now, I'm as keen on renewables as anybody else, but you've just... The idea that somehow or other there is something morally better in renewables seems to me to be a deeply flawed theological view. The fact of the matter is, renewables will play an increasing part, but there are problems with renewables. The wind doesn't always blow. And more importantly for Britain, and even on a day like this after 14 days of it in Norway, even here there is a problem with the sun. And we found that because photovoltaics have been falling in price to such a degree, and the attraction of putting in photovoltaics was so great, we found that far too much of the money that we have got from the Treasury was being taken up by solar farms. Now, the difficulty with solar farms is that it produces energy at a time we don't want it. And it's no good. And so, of course, there's now terrible row because the government has reduced the subsidy for solar. And this was supposed to be a terrible backward sliding of the government. Absolutely unacceptable, say the Greens. The truth is, I've got very generous £6.7 billion to do the necessary changes in the electricity market between now and 2020. And I need for that money to be spent the best possible way. And if too much of it's spent on photovoltaics, two things will happen. First is I won't move as fast as I need to do on the decarbonisation of the electricity system. And secondly, when we get to 2020, it'll be quite obvious that we're not actually able to provide as much generating power at the very times we need it as we ought to be able to do. So at a time in which the Conservative government in Britain, Conservative-led government in Britain, has cut back on everything except overseas aid and climate change. I mean, it is an interesting statement about a Conservative government that the two things that it has protected are overseas aid and our battle against climate change. I find this very helpful when I have to battle with the appalling Mr. Abbott, the Prime Minister of Australia, because I point out that he isn't a Conservative. This upsets him considerably, and I enjoy that. Because the point is, Conservatives are supposed by their nature to look after the next generation. That's the whole point. Conserve, that's what the word comes from. It's about keeping what's best and handing it on. And you don't do that by frying the planet. And what he's doing is not only frying the planet, but cutting Australian overseas aid, and that's a disgrace for a rich country. And you put the two together and you make this comment, and it really hurts. So I'm enjoying that. Well, I'm hoping it's going to hurt enough for him to actually change in his views. But there is a problem about the Green Taliban, actually. I mean, there really is a problem. And that is this sort of determination to believe that this is a theological argument. And in that sense, they're in the same box as the Tea Party at the other end. And actually, we ought to try to detoxify this whole discussion. This is a perfectly simple discussion. It is a matter of risk. We have been told by those in the best position to know that we have a very serious risk, as to about 95%, that we are going to create a situation in which the world will not be able to be lived in the way which we want. Because we are burning fossil fuels largely, we are in fact changing the climate. That's a perfectly reasonable, logical statement. And given that the proof is as strong as the link between smoking and cancer, we ought to do something about it. And we ought to get upset about it on either end. And one of the things I try all the time is to try to keep the consensus going, because that's what, after all, the whole idea of the Climate Change Act and the whole idea of the Climate Change Committee is that we keep the consensus, the sensible middle, together. And therefore you mustn't use it as a mechanism of pushing your own private particular likes. For example, there are some people who don't like nuclear power. I mean, I happen to be in favour of nuclear power. I also happen to think that the nuclear industry is one of the worst industries I've ever had to deal with, and the likelihood of them ever meeting any target at any price which they've promised is very small. And therefore you have to accept that these are not, this is for me an interim technology. But it happens to be a necessary interim technology if you don't want to get into the German situation of burning an awful lot more coal and all sorts of other things. This is not a bad system in the meantime, but don't think it's cheap, don't think it's going to get any cheaper, and don't think it'll be there by the time we get offshore wind down to a price which is going to be competitive, which will be about 2020. And therefore do recognise that there is not only a mix in a portfolio sense, but there is a mix in a time sense. But don't either say, we can't do any of this is all unacceptable. Nuclear is if you really think nuclear is unacceptable, you're not taking climate change seriously. Because you've got to accept that climate change is the biggest risk we've got. And so whatever you think about nuclear, it's a lesser risk than that. And therefore you've got to accept that there may be a case for it. You may happen to think you can mix things in a different way, but don't get theological about it. Don't get dogmatic about it. Don't try to say there is something deeply unacceptable. Similarly, on fracking, I'm so pleased they invented the word fracking because it sounds nasty in the first place. So it's a good beginning for the whole discussion. But I think that, again, you've got two sets of people who are utterly dogmatic about it. You've got at one end for people for whom this is the unforgivable sin, that the one thing you can never do is frack, that it is wrong in every possible way. And the other end, you've got people who think that it really will be a game changer. It's actually neither of those things. It's certainly neither of those things in the United Kingdom. I mean, we will frack. But God has been very careful to put the best bits to frack under some of the most beautiful countryside. And if anybody actually thinks that the Conservative or Liberal Democrat councillors who almost entirely represent that countryside are going to vote in favour of fracking machines, then they haven't noticed that they voted against every windmill you ever wanted to put there. So the idea that they will have fracking but not windmills seems to me to be extremely unlikely. So we're not going to have a great explosion of fracked gas, but we will have some fracked gas. We don't know how much, because we haven't done the work yet to discover. But we'll find that where the fracked gas tends to come will be from the old industrial areas. It's not the best place for fracked gas, and we do happen to have a rather difficult position in Britain because it's much deeper down and it's in little penny packets. You have to move the fracking machines, say it rather delicately, move the fracking machines every sort of 100 yards because it doesn't work otherwise. So, but don't, for goodness sake, take an absolutist position. Because if you do, particularly if you take it in what many of us here would say would be the better direction, which is to be wary of fracking, if you do, then you begin to make people out there think of this issue as a great issue of faith. And it isn't. I come back to it. It's a very simple issue of risk. And once you get away from the issue of risk, then you do get yourself into the angry brigade and the argument of people for whom it has no longer, it has ceased to be a rational discussion and has become a great desire to present their own view of the world. Well, I want to end with where the problems are, because it's only fair to say that. The first problem is that we have a gap. We've got a very clear pathway up to 2020. We've got the budgets thereafter, but they are not deeply prescriptive. In other words, they say in general terms what we have to achieve in terms of emission reduction. They show a sensible route. They have some very clear signposts in them, but they do not have statutory carbon intensity figures in them. That's purposeful because once you get over 2020, it's quite difficult to decide what is the exact mix that you would want to do and which of those would produce what in each of those 4 or 5 year periods. So it's a sensible thing to do, but we have said that there ought to be a carbon intensity target for 2030. That is going to be a real political argument. We tried to get it before the next election, which is next year. We couldn't get the present government to accept it, but we did get them to insert into the electricity reform operation, which is a very major bill they passed, which was entirely reformed in order to make the climate change thing work and deliver the decarbonisation. In the electricity reform mechanism, there is a commitment that they can, and parliamentary powers, to set a carbon intensity target for 2030. Now that will all fit in with the agreement which is made in the European Union. The problem, of course, was that they beat us on it because they said we can't make that decision before we know what the European Union is going to do because we have to fit in with that. And that is true. It's not an argument. Although we'd have preferred to have had it and then altered it in accordance with what the European Union did, because it would help us to push the figure up in the European Union. Britain has, in terms of its international negotiations, been very much on the top end of the scale, wanting most ambitious changes in the European Union. Actually, what we're doing and what the European Union is at the moment likely to do at its most pessimistic fits exactly. What we were trying to do was to push the European Union up, and that would enable us to move also up. Because we could then say we're doing it together. Because of course there is always this argument with people as to whether you're ahead of them and what is other people doing and what does it matter because we've only got 2% of the emissions or whatever the particular argument is. And that's always a difficult argument. I mean, it's a nonsense argument, but it's a difficult one to deal with. And that's really why we didn't win that battle, and it'll be a battle I have to fight next year after the election, depending on who is elected. As we have a very peculiar situation at the moment. Nobody knows who will win. I mean, you'd be very, very stupid to put your money on anything. A continuation of this coalition, a Conservative majority, a Labour majority, a Labour coalition, all are possible. And it would be very difficult to know. So I don't know who I'm going to deal with. So my famed independence is very important. I think I need to. And of course I spend my time dealing with all of them to make sure everybody's reasonably on side. And the other failure, in a sense, is that we've allowed people to argue about the fourth carbon budget. We have a system which is that given that we have to do the budget so far ahead, it is conceivable that you would come to a point in which the budget really doesn't work. Either that it's not tight enough or that it's too tight, given what one has managed to do before. And there is a review process. The review process is quite clear in the Act, and that is that the review process is done not by the government but by the Climate Change Committee. And we have to tell the government if it is right to change the budget. In other words, we have to review the budget, taking the basis upon which the budget is placed and was worked out in the first place. You can't add new things, you just have to take what was the argument in the first place. And then you have to say, have any of these elements changed so much that we ought to tighten the budget or loosen it? And you then, it's for the committee to say whether they've changed enough and to make the recommendation, but it's for the government to decide whether it'll actually do it. Now, the government has managed to give the impression that it also can review the budget. This is actually not true under the Act, and there's a good deal of sort of posing and moving about on this thing, because again, the Treasury wants to show that it's in charge. So I've made it very clear publicly that, as far as I'm concerned, this is what the Act says, that's what we're going to do, and the hidden part of that is if the government tried to do anything otherwise, then it would find itself in court. I wouldn't, of course, take them to court, but I have absolutely no doubt that about half a dozen people would be fighting to take them to court, and I'd have to give evidence, and the evidence would be very clear, which is that there is no reason to change the budget, except possibly to tighten it a bit. But you couldn't decide to do that until you knew what the European Union as a whole was doing. And that won't be for 2 or 3 years, so we wouldn't do it in that sense. And I have committed myself to review it in those circumstances. Obviously, one would have to do that because that would be the right thing under the Act. But otherwise, the system works really very well. And it means that for most people, the whole thing runs on perfectly acceptably. But there are arguments, obviously, because it means that the price of energy is slightly higher than it would otherwise be, because we are taxing fossil fuels in order to pay for renewables. And that's the way the government decided it was going to do it. It doesn't come out of general taxation, it comes out of energy use. And if you want better energy use, and if you want to reduce energy use, and if you want to be more sensible in that use, then that's not an unreasonable way. But that is a political decision where the money comes from. My job is to make sure that that cost is as low as it possibly can be, commensurate with actually delivering the end. Right, well, to finish with, we're all in this together. So one of the things I have to do is to try to explain to people what we do, as I'm doing now, but also to say to people, it doesn't actually matter much what you do, although our experience is that it has been extremely healthy to move it outside the daily argument of Parliament, and that even in countries like Norway and Germany, where in general there is a commitment to do these things, just creating an institution which enables it to go on irrespective of the vagaries of elections, I think is very important, not only nationally but internationally, because it shows that you are committing yourself over a long period of time. So when you come for your international negotiations, you can actually show yourself having put yourself into a position so that you are practicing what you preach. And you're not just doing it for the next couple of years, you're actually doing it in order to achieve the end. And that leads me to my last point, which is that we are in this all together, and it is very exciting to see what is happening around the world. You should never allow anybody to suggest that only we are doing it, only Norway's doing it, only Europe's doing it, only Britain's doing it. It isn't true. Mexico is the furthest advanced country, both in its policy implementation and in its actual legislation. Because it's been so good, it has encouraged other countries building their climate change legislation. We've got the Ecuadorians, we've got the Chileans, we've got the Costa Ricans. The Brazilians have been a bit slower, but they are moving. The Colombians have now come forward with a very major decision on the changes that they're going to make. So you begin to see over the whole of Latin America a very, very real change. And then you look at what the Chinese are doing, which is in many ways bigger than any of us. After all, we've exported so much of our manufacturing to China, we then complained about the increase in their emissions. It always seemed to be a most unfair argument. You give them the stuff to manufacture and then you complain about their emissions. But they've already got carbon intensity targets which are much tougher than most, and there is no doubt that they are now working on the point at which they're going to be able to have an absolute cap, and that's what all these whispering is about. It's about preparing people for it, and that's why they've set up 5 places where they've got a carbon market. It's why they're spending a lot of time talking to other countries. It explains the signatures of the agreement between the United Kingdom and China yesterday, and I must say it's a very remarkable change. And the reason is they believe in climate change and they are suffering from it. And they know they've got to do something about it. And they're so big they know they can't say it's nothing to do with us. So although they will try to get the money out of the West, and so they should because we benefited from all this pollution, at the same time they are serious about it. South Korea will be carbon neutral by the year 2050. They're very, very tough. They're absolutely remarkable. It's happening in New Zealand, it's happening in South Africa. The excitement among African nations actually to do things themselves is huge. I went to a conference in South America where most of the African nations were represented, and for the very first time you saw countries that didn't start off by saying, are you going to pay for it, but started off by saying, this is what we're going to do. Led by the Senegalese and by the Senegalese, I didn't see the news today, the Senegalese, one of their big cities is, they've already lost huge areas of land to the sea. And they are seeing populations of maybe as many as 1 million that are going to have to be moved simply because the sea rise is affecting them directly. And of course those sort of countries are taking this very, very seriously, as Micronesia is. Countries with every difficulty, but still trying, even countries like the South Sudan are actually seriously seeing what they can do in the pathetic, awful circumstances about climate change. So don't let anybody say to you that it's only us. The fact is, it's not enough. If you add it all up, it still doesn't meet the decline in emissions we need to keep ourselves within a 2-degree increase on pre-industrial level. It's still not enough, but it is creating the institution which will make it possible. So you can have an overall, overarching agreement, but the national commitment to that will not only make that real, but it will add it up gradually, make it possible. Now, of course it will mean that when we add it up, first of all, it won't add up to what it ought to add up. But it's much easier to get people to do a bit more if they've committed themselves to something. You know, Dr. Bernardo always said that the first step that makes the difference is what you do first. To get that on the way, you're on the journey. If you haven't made the first step, you haven't got a hope. And this is the change that is taking place. And I never go away from an audience without just reminding them of what they themselves can do. Norway is, of course, very important because Norway has established for itself a leadership role, sometimes rather a nannying leadership role, but it's one which you have done all around the world, so people look at you. And there are 2 big things you can do. One is I do think that it would make a big difference if you created some form of, and not necessarily the same thing, but some form of system which meant that you took the institutionalization of all this out of the short-termism which is inevitable, because even if one government signs up to it and the other people say they would go on doing it, it's just not certain enough, and there is a good deal to be said to institutionalise that. And the second thing is, I think there's going to be more and more need to look at your sovereign wealth fund and about how that invests. I don't think we can avoid the fact that investment in fossil fuels and the use of the market to push these things is crucial. It's that that is really making the extremists angry. It's that that frightens the Koch brothers. It's that that frightens the big American money which is behind the anti-climate change operations. And it's all over the world. They're spending a huge amount of money. And what frightens them is if the financial world begins to see this as a real risk to its own investments. And therefore I think this is an area all of us have got to take very seriously indeed. So I hope you will join in the battle, and if you haven't done it already, and join in the argument, which is very important. And I repeat it again, Lord Deben, at Lord Deben, join in and enjoy yourself with some of the most interesting people in Norway. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lord Deben. Are you willing to take a few questions?
Of course.
I have one to start with. I understand that under the Climate Change Act, there are carbon budgets broken down somehow to sectors or agencies. And then my question is, who are these sectors and agencies, and do they have instruments that make it possible for them to assume this responsibility?
Yes, the sectoral parts of the carbon budget are fundamentally indicative in terms of what the Climate Change Committee does. The government then sets up a mechanism to be able to deal with this, and there are contracts with most major sectors on their reduction of emissions. And the contracts are backed up by enabling them to avoid paying the highest level of carbon levy. So they come to an agreement saying that they will reduce, and we monitor them, it's properly monitored. They, you know, I'm taking a funny example, but I'm going to take the hospitality industry will say we will reduce by X%. And on that basis, you do a deal with them. It's worked reasonably well so far, but I think it's a mechanism which we're going to have to change as the time goes on, because as you reduce the low-hanging fruit, as you do the things that are easy to do, then it becomes more difficult to enforce, and you begin to want to be rather more specific. The disappointment is that industry, as against commerce, and light industry, heavy industry in particular, has not improved its energy efficiency anything like what it ought to do. And the figures only look better because of the recession as far as they're concerned. And that's a great pity. And we don't quite know why either. We don't know why the price pressures, which you would have thought would be really strong in industry, don't seem to have had that effect.
Okay, any other comments or questions from the audience? Lou Fulton, our American, please, the floor is yours. And next one is the Australian.
Yes. So now each of our national representatives have to have a rebuttal. No, I appreciated your comments about the way things are looked at by the climate deniers, many of whom are American, and I thought it was pretty accurate. And I appreciated also the way you showed that, discussed how, it's total denial, followed by an attitude of, well, it's not important enough, we don't know enough. And but I feel like we may be entering into a new phase, and where I really have started to notice it in the US is as we've gotten some news stories about major climatic-related events. The most recent one is about the West Arctic ice sheet, and that we probably will lose it, and it's too late to stop that from happening. So there's a certain bit of fait accompli there. And when that news hit, those weekends talk shows with the talking heads, I began to detect what I can only, as a crude American, call an attitude emerging of, well, fuck it. It's like, the same people who were deniers yesterday are suddenly saying it's too late, forget about it, we'll worry about other problems. Do you detect anything like that in the UK, or is that not a problem? I really worry about this hopscotching over dealing with the problem.
Well, I don't worry about it because it seems to me that down human history, the alternative to proper behaviour is eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die. I mean, I think that is the alternative. All through the medieval period you see that. You know, one has a certain sympathy with that argument because it's, and in a secular society, of course, it's particularly strong because if you don't think there's anything after it all, nobody's going to ask about what you did. The fact of the matter is, it's quite a, it is a very encouraging thing because you live the rest of your life because it's not actually going to make the difference to you if you're rich, and therefore I think there is some of that. And of course it excuses one from action. But it is I don't think it's new. It seems to me the fundamental moral argument. I mean, it's the older I get, the more I'm impressed in the truth of the first chapters of Genesis. You know, when you know, you can't live in the garden. Once you've eaten the apple, once you understand, once you know, the world is different, and you can't live as if you didn't know. And that's a very difficult lesson to learn. It took all the Jews for thousands of years to learn it, but it's a lesson you have to learn. And this is what they're doing, actually, is they are, in a sense, refusing to accept they know. And that is, it seems to me, one of the great Christian, human heresies. It is a thing that humanity wants. It's a sort of original sin. It's a thing they really want to do. They want to unknow. And they can't unknow. But they will try.
So maybe it's a step along the way.
Yeah, I think it's just, you know, we just have to fight that one like we fought all the other ones. And after all, the best thing you can do is to read the story of the tobacco industry and how they put off proper action on tobacco for 40 years. And it's quite interesting to see that some of the players in the anti-climate change industry are the same players. Certainly the same PR companies are receiving large sums of money to do it all, and they're doing it in exactly the same way. And they do it in the cleverest of ways, which is never to confront it, it's always to create doubt. So you don't confront it, you create doubt, and there are different sorts of doubt. There's the doubt which says, do you think we can do anything about it? There's the doubt which says, well, you know, there are some people in the University of Wisconsin, there's some very interesting research being done, which may show that it isn't really this at all. Not mentioning that it's the coal industry that's paying for the research, as it was the tobacco industry that used to pay for the research in the other circumstances. And they used to pay for it so they could point to research being done which might, just might, produce an answer which is different. And then, of course, there's the one, well, I'm sure it's happening, but the things we've got to deal with are not right yet, so we better wait until we've got those. So it's the doubt business. And one of the doubts are, do you really think we can do anything about the Arctic now? Well, you know, I've got a golf game to play. I mean, it's very... what is exciting in America is, first of all, Obama, you know, finding his some sort of masculinity and doing something, and the fact that some states are behaving so well, and one should never be ashamed to say how good quite a lot of America is. Just as Canada, which is a scandal and a disgrace, does have British Columbia, and British Columbia has the best taxation system on carbon that there is in the world, and is really very effective and all-party and very good indeed. So we must remember there's a good deal of stuff going on in America which is to be supported, but also to remember that climate change is very difficult for Americans because half of Americans don't believe in evolution. So how can you expect them to move on to climate change? It's a long time to go. Very, very difficult.
Okay, there is one more question this time from Glenn Peters.
Yeah, Glenn Peters from Cicero. Thanks for the presentation. You touched on many interesting things. I just want to touch on one that you had at the end, which is this sort of slow, gradual build-up of climate policies around the world, and you had a quite positive spin on that. If I look at the IPCC assessment 103 report and the challenge to keep temperatures to 2 degrees using the rather optimistic, I'd say, integrated assessment models, requiring huge reductions in emissions starting very soon, having a full spectrum of technologies available, is a slow bottom-up process sufficient to get to 2 degrees? Maybe it will get to 3 to 4, but what do we have to do to get to 2 degrees?
No, it's not sufficient, but you have to do what you can do with what you've got. And when you've done that, then as people get more and more aware of the reality of the dangers, you've got something to improve. That's what I'm really trying to say, is that what you do now is to get a system which enables you to improve it. Because if Ghana signs up and got itself into a situation in which it's going to remove its emissions on a trajectory which goes like that, it's much easier to move it to go like that than if it's not got a trajectory at all. So, I mean, I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish about it, because I'm not. But I also am very conscious of the eat, drink and be merry for tomorrow we die. What we won't do is, if we frighten everybody to say it's so bloody awful and so difficult and so awkward, and what you've really got to do is to start living lives totally different immediately, then we won't get anybody to do anything. So I do think we've got to temper our... I'm on your side of the assessment of the size of the risk and the dangers, but I'm also a believer that you've got to find the political ways of getting people to get together and do these things. It is a global problem, it's a global answer, and that's very difficult to achieve. I am, I suppose, in my heart of hearts, amazed that we've got as far as we have got, having tried to negotiate the Common Agricultural Policy for 7 years. I tell you, it's very remarkable how much we've managed to get together, even on this. But I'm much more worried about the confrontation with those few people who really want to turn the whole clock back. And that's why I have this thing about Abbott, because I think Abbott is a disgrace, because he's an intellectually astute person who has decided to be a populist. And I think that is the most wicked thing you can do. In other words, I think that's the, if you like, that's the opposite of the parable of the talents. You've got your 10 talents, and instead of using them, you do the opposite. You use them to defy everything that you know. And if he were a stupid thickhead, and that hasn't been known in Australian politics, if he were that would be different. But he isn't. He's a Rhodes Scholar. He should and does know better. And it's that absolutely political, I think, it's an attitude to politics which for me is deeply offensive. And that's why I think we have to corner these people. And the idea is going to have an international agreement between him and the Canadians and the British, well, he soon got a very short, sharp shot from the British in language which the Australians understand, but I won't use here.
Do we have time for one more question?
Of course, I'm with you.
Okay, there's one from Transnova, the Norwegian agency to promote climate-friendly transport technology, please.
Do you have a plan for, or a strategy on how to introduce electric vehicles in Great Britain?
Yes, it's a major part of our decarbonisation of electricity, of course. I mean, we have to do that to be effective. We have already got encouragement for electric vehicles. It's not as generous as the Norwegians, and I keep on quoting the Norwegians as being very much the best on electric vehicles, which explains your very high use of electrical vehicles. I've always believed that in the rather practical way of the British, the electrical vehicle had to reach a point at which, I mean, given the nature of journeys that we know, had to reach a point at which it had a capacity of 150 miles before we'd actually get the sort of support which we actually need, and it's very nearly there. It's got to take people to their weekend house. That's what it's got to do, and that's important because the sort of people who are going to spend this, because it'll start off as the second car, replacing a second car. That's how it starts, and is starting in that way. But those people want to feel that they can do that journey. So it's been that issue, but we're now doing a great deal about the infrastructure. We have a reasonable offer. Our other big issue is to see if we can get the government to change the rules so that we can make it much easier for people to have fleets of electric cars. And you can do that very simply because if you remove the tax problem, if you have a company car, the tax that you pay is considerable. If you just remove that and said if your company car was electrical, you wouldn't have to pay that tax, or wouldn't pay anything like as much tax. You would change the world. So that's the issue we're trying to do that. I don't think we could have done it until just about now, when there's a choice of vehicles. They're very much better. The price is very much closer. People now believe that electrical vehicles will become the norm. people liked driving the electric. They thought they were going to be awful. I've always found that very difficult because I don't particularly like cars myself. I like them to take me to one place to another, but I'm not excited. I'm not a petrol head anyway. I'm rather pleased to find that those who are petrol heads actually rather like driving electric cars. And I rather enjoy the fact that we're having to put some sort of noise in them when they're at the bottom, because I have my electric car and I managed to drive over the inspector of police who looks after the House of Commons. That was a very dangerous thing. But he then apologised because he said he ought to have looked out, and so it was all right, but I'm a bit worried about it.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I would just like to thank you a lot, Lord Deben. I heard you in Arendal last year, and I immediately decided this is the inspiration we need for our conference. I think it was exactly what we wanted, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I know you travel a lot, but you can always come